Welcome to Dr. Lottie's Science with Soul, the podcast that transcends the boundaries between science and spirituality. Prepare to be uplifted, transformed, and awakened to create a path to healing your own life physically, emotionally, and spiritually by bridging the gap between science and soul. Embark on an enlightening journey of self-discovery and spiritual awakening in an 8-module course designed to help you connect with your spirit team and expand your consciousness. I'm delighted to share with you an exciting announcement. My very first online self-study course is officially live. I've had the privilege of working with clients from all corners of the globe, and one question that consistently arises is, how can I connect with my own spirit guides? How do I embark on a journey of meditation and connect with my spirit animal? And importantly, how do I begin to develop my spiritual practice? In response to these questions, I've poured my heart into crafting a unique online course that transcends geographical boundaries, introducing Connecting with Your Spirit Team. This course isn't just about gaining knowledge. It's about unlocking the door, the profound spiritual experiences wherever you may be in the world. If you're looking to explore the realms of spirituality, this course is designed to meet you exactly where you are. Are you ready to embark on a journey of self-discovery and spiritual awakening? Join me in connecting with your spirit team and unlock the profound guidance and support that awaits you. The link to sign up can be found in the show notes of this episode. Enroll now and take a first step towards a deeper connection with your inner self and the spiritual realm. Welcome to Dr. Lottie's Science with Soul. Today's guest is Gary Barker, PhD, who has been a global voice in engaging men and boys in advancing gender equality, gender justice, and positive masculinities for 3 decades. He is the CEO and co-founder of Equimundo Center for Masculinities and Social Justice, formerly Promundo US, a major contributor to international activism on male allyship in gender equality. He was the first executive director of Instituto Promundo in Brazil and led its pioneering work on healthy masculinities. He is co-founder of Men Care, a global campaign in more than 50 countries to promote men's involvement as caregivers, and co-founder of Men Engage, a global alliance of more than 700 NGOs. He co-created the International Men and Gender Equality Survey, Images, the largest survey of men's attitudes and behavior related to violence, fatherhood, and gender equality. He leads Equimundo's State of the World's Fathers Reports, which has become a major advocacy platform for the global care economy. He has coordinated Equimundo's partnerships in conflict-affected settings, including work on community-based trauma support and restorative justice in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Balkans, the US, and Brazil. He advises the United Nations, the World Bank, national governments, international foundations, and corporations on strategies to engage men and boys in promoting gender equality. In 2017, he was named by Apolitical as one of the 20 most influential people in gender policy worldwide. He is an Ashoka Fellow and received the Voices of Solidarity Award from Vital Voices for his work to engage men for gender equality. He holds a PhD in developmental psychology and a research affiliate position at the Center for Social Sciences, University of Coimbra, Portugal. He lived nearly 20 years in Latin America and is fluent in Spanish and Portuguese. So welcome to Science with Soul, Gary. It's such an honor to have you as a guest today.
All right, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
So I learned about you. Actually, I watched your TED Talk on YouTube about masculinity. And it was one of those moments, you say, oh my gosh, I got to have this guy on my podcast. I mean, it's just the work you're doing is just amazing. So tell us, what it is that you do and what drove you to do this work about masculinity worldwide.
Yeah. So I'll talk about the what, and then I'll talk about how I get here. So I founded an organization called Equimundo, previously called Promundo, that works to engage men both to break cycles of violence and to promote cycles of care. Um, and simply just, how do we support better versions of manhood out there, acknowledging how urgent that is for women's lives, for our own lives as men, for generations of boys and girls and non-binary children stepping into the world, that there are ways that we make manhood that are causing harm, but there's a huge amount of men and people who love and care for men who already are doing it differently. So we do program work, research, advocacy, and I can talk a little bit about the things that we do. And sometimes if I'm at a cocktail party and somebody wants to hear the one sentence, I'll say, we've been making men nice since 2001. And it's, that sounds a little pedantic, like we're trying to teach men to be,
Right.
that somehow that we are, flawed humans. So I, will then have a better, longer conversation. Um, why do I do this work? When in the US and many parts of the world, when you're, 12, 13, there's that vocational test and vocational aptitude reflection. What do you want to be? Um, there was not a, we'll grow up and talk about manhood and how to make it better. There was no, that was nothing on, that wasn't on the charts. But it was really stuff lived back then. My father was a social worker. He passed away a few years ago. My home life was adopted children, foster children from the US and elsewhere. And so my dad lived an ethic of men care about children and the well-being of others. And it's a vocation and an avocation and I like to say that he sort of conjugated the verb to care as a political and a personal verb. And so that was the version of manhood that I had at home, and really, feel honored to and lucky and, just blessed that I had a father like that who brought those values of manhood. And my mother, I don't want to, do not want to, give her any short shrift in the conversation, but important to me to see a man living that. Um, and then at the same time, we moved from California to Texas, a different version of manhood that kind of lived up to the stereotypes in many ways, um, of cowboy boots and pickup trucks and guns. While at the same time, there were folks like me who played tennis and were in the drama club and did lots of other stuff that was maybe lots of counterculture happening with the mainstream culture. And then a fateful day, and I talk about this in my TED Talk, of witnessing a school shooting in my high school in 1977, long before we had words that we described, shelter in place and run. What are the three things? Run, hide, fight, right? That now we've got a whole training that we offer. We had no words around that. There were no trauma support. It was, they sent us back to class the same day that it happened. And again, I still wasn't really talking about manhood then, but in the beginning of my career was working with survivors of violence, first in Latin America mostly, in post-conflict and conflict settings, children affected by gang violence, young people affected by gang violence. I was focusing on survivors. And along the way, kept saying, well, what are we doing to look upstream? And how do we talk about one of the big drivers of violence, or one key factor of it, which is how male it is? Whether it's homicide, war, violence in the home, suicide, vast majority of the most egregious violence in the world is men, the vast majority of men not carrying out that violence, but kind of unsure what is our role to try to break those cycles. I did not have an idea that when I started asking those questions 20x years ago, that would be a career and there would still be lots to do. And I wish there was less to do.
So how do you, I mean, how do we address this issue? Because how do you look at what's going on in the United States today? Let's start there. How do we, you know, deconstruct the patriarchy that we have so much of and is coming back more in this country right now?
Yeah. And we've done, several research projects on it, looking at how we're going backwards, that, the number of young men who believe in a version of manhood that's associated with being tough, not showing when you feel anxious or unsure, not seeking help, that violence is a valid way to get what you want, that your job is to put women in their place. It is frightening and disturbing that more young men believe in that believed in it 10 years back. Add to that what our research is finding and others of just how much of life for young men and social connection is online. Um, and that, such that we find sort of, more than half of young men saying my online life is more interesting than my offline life. Um, and the number who also gravitate towards some of the harmful voices online. So we've got kind of this, very challenging perfect storm of some young men who think the whole conversation coming out of Me Too went too far. They feel called out as opposed to called into a conversation. They feel themselves labeled. They very rightly push back on this expression, toxic masculinity. I agree, it immediately cuts off a conversation. You sort of, I'm male, therefore masculinity has to do with me, therefore toxic. You think I'm toxic. I think so much of our conversation has been calling out harmful behavior without doing it in compassionate ways. Now, obviously, there's lots of folks and lots of men we need to hold accountable, but to understand just the complexity and variety of men, and to understand that lots of men are hurting and looking for a conversation, it doesn't really help if we say, yeah, let's talk about that toxic masculinity when he wants to talk about loneliness. So, I think we who care about this issue in thoughtful, progressive ways are running into our own kind of political correctness at times, keeps us in the way of having the conversations that I think men want to have. Where I'm encouraged, we've just done like a big sweep of what's happening with young men's online lives. And it's probably fair to say that 70, 80% of it is just guys looking to connect, just looking to have conversations. Now that's there's a lot of us in this country, in the US. So the 20% who may be gravitating toward the harmful voices, that's a lot of angry men. But I think it makes me look at the situation and say, mostly it's guys trying to be their best selves. Let's not panic. Let us engage them, believing that we can connect. They want to be cared for. They can care for others. They are actually figuring it out. We don't let's not label young men problems. Let's not over present a crisis. So I suppose, to those who may be parents, to those who are teachers, to those who love and engage young men, stay in the room, don't label, be willing to listen. And, I talked to a 19-year-old who was taking off on a trek, kind of 3 months on a wilderness journey. And he was saying this as well, of a lot of us are figuring it out. Don't present us as these walking problems who need you to fix us. And I think, it's a good wake up moment of, am I help that's here to actually help based on what you want? Or am I coming with a prescription that says, you're in a crisis, let me fix you? Um, Not surprisingly, young men, nobody wants you to come and say, you're a walking problem, let me fix you. So how to step into that with kind of believing young men are ready to be their full-hearted selves.
Right. I mean, it's so interesting. You spoke about, you spent time in California, then you moved to Texas. Now I've spent 18 years in California, and it's very different. And we moved to in the middle of Long Island, New York,
Wow.
when my boys were they just turned 6 and 4, and my daughter was 1, and it was like moving to a foreign country. Right. It was so different. And I remember how my boys struggled with having to be tough. There was a very different toughness in New York than it was in California. California is, I don't know, it's like flower children compared to the groups and the kids that they were playing with. And then they get to New York and they got a lot of kids that had moved out to Long Island. They were, raised from, the parents were from Brooklyn, Queens. They were just a very different toughness. They were ready to fight, physically fight at any moment.
Yeah.
And it's so different, the cultural just within the United States. And you moving to Texas, I'm sure you had a similar experience where everything was very different. The social norms, what's acceptable, the behavior that's acceptable in the different states within the United States is very different.
Yeah. And across, social class issues and, in our big high schools, I mean, we had several tribes of manhood from, the sort of cowboy leaning guys who liked guns and pickup trucks. And if they didn't have them, their brothers and fathers did, to, at the time it was, the hippies were the other ones and the jocks, and they could sometimes, go across. And then there were a few of us who were, I suppose in the, kind of theater art space and just tried to, practice the art of not being seen. Like, don't pick on me and try to recruit me for your group. Just leave me alone. But that's it's not a very useful, like, survival approach of like trying not to be seen so you don't get picked on, right? Or,
Right.
um, but so I think, there were some California guys in my Texas school and some Texas guys in my California school. Those are stereotypes, obviously, but I think it's to be open to just how varied we are. And there's a lot of variation, even in the guys. I was happily surprised at times and also frightened at other times of some of the guys who presented as, and I feel like I'm picking on a portion of a state that I also have deep love for. That some of the cowboy guys, once you peeled away, there was some deep hurt that they wanted to talk about. Or, they were deeply, deeply supportive of their sisters or a girlfriend and could be very progressive on some other stuff. So, there's all that happening, but it's also, it's complicated. And, it's easier now than the bully is not staring, I'm not staring up at him, I suppose, to kind of look and go, behind each bully is a very hurt young man, sometimes adult man.
Mhm.
And that's a different conversation if I say it is a way that he's asking for help. And it's an unfortunate way, and we've got to keep him from causing harm. But it's a simple truism that hurt men hurt others. So to be able to step into the conversation and say a timeout actually doesn't do you any good because it just alienates you more,
Mhm.
making you stay in the room for the hard conversation, acknowledging harm that you've carried out, learning new ways of interacting, and having others see you is the way we fix you. Not just saying you're bad, you're out of here. So for every stereotype that I use, I also try to deconstruct it if that's
Right. No,
the
it is. It
same.
is a difficult topic, right? And you're
Yeah.
dealing with so many different norms that are acceptable in society itself. But thinking of, growing up in Sweden, so I moved to the United States when I was 21 and going through the Swedish school system as a child and then having my own kids here in the United States. It's so different, right? So we have sex education starts in sixth grade. We're 12. We start school when we're 7.
Yeah.
And by eighth grade, we're 14. We have the biology teacher will have, co-ed sexual education. All the contraceptives are passed around in the classroom. Everybody gets to touch it, feel it, smell it, and everybody's laughing and making jokes, but everybody's open about it. And there is also a child development that you go through in eighth grade, how to raise a child up until the age of 5, and all the responsibilities that come with that. So guess what happens in eighth grade? Everybody's well informed, right? And not to cross boundaries. And I'm sure, it
Yeah.
still happens, but it's such
Yep.
a different society. And then when you do grow up and have a child, the woman gets, I don't know if it's 9 months or 12 months now
Yeah.
of
No, you have
of
amazing
of
leave
leave,
policies. Yeah. Yeah. He
right?
does
And the
too.
father they get to split
Equal
it,
amount for him. Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's very different. But when you look at that, how we are taught in school is very different. And, conflict resolution and all those things versus in this country is very, very different.
Yeah.
Right. So it is the whole, I mean, it's part of it is the school, part of it is society. Every state has their own rules. So, I mean, where do you start to try and bring this message across the people to that next generation?
Yeah. I mean, one you touched on, which, I've spent some time in Sweden. We've done a lot of work with the folks who have implemented Sweden's amazing parental leave policy, right? Which is equal time, non-transferable days for dads. And you get essentially a year each parent of leave from when your child is a newborn up until they're 12 or 13, if I have the details right. And they basically figured out how to weave that sounds crazy in the US. It's paid up into a certain amount. We've now got it available in a growing number of states, progressive states in a few cities. It's not that generous anywhere in the US. But unless you're in a lucky, you're lucky enough to work in a couple of corporations who offer it. And lo and behold, Sweden's not gone broke because of it, right? The tax burden is not gone off the charts. Men and women both want it, they vote for it. Politics, right or left, they vote for it. And I think a cool part is watching like what it does to change that. Look at the number of dads you see with newborns out and about, young kids. The normality of it when a man says, I can't be at the 4 o'clock meeting because I have to go do X with my child. Um, I remember when I was interviewing some men who were part of the father training they had to go along with or have to go along with this in Sweden. And guys were like, even the, most lumberjack looking guys were like, well, you would not dare take less than 6 to 8 weeks of your leave. You might not want to take it all because that might not look so good, but you wouldn't, your buddies would give you a hard time if you didn't take at least 2 months of it.
Mhm.
Now that's probably even shifted more around just making this normal that men do caregiving. And if I'm encouraged by, some of our work over these years, and the US included, men are doing more of the hands-on care work. It is a lot more normal these days. Men centering it in their lives, asking for leave. Research we've done showed men care as much about access to childcare, the kind of policies that we need, and they care about it as much personally. Um, we've got, we've got 2 million primary caregiving stay-at-home dads in the US. Um, that's still a lot less than stay-at-home moms, but it's a pretty sizable number. And talking to some of them, and I had some months of being a stay-at-home dad when my daughter was born 26 years ago. It is life transforming. Men finding meaning in care um, feels to me a place where we've got, men already see this is the change. This is what it looks like. I get to be emotionally connected to my children in deeper ways. And it just, it kind of keeps paying forward. So I think that's where we find like an immediate hook to get. I was on a webinar early this morning with the European Central Bank, 180 people. They are of their staff. They're trying to push through gender equality. I won't go into too many details because some things, stay in that conversation. But the part where men were ready to be on board, right? Economists who coordinate how does the EU economic system hold together of kind of they could put down that and talk about I want to be, being a caring parent matters a huge amount to me. That is when it feels like that we kind of we lower the kind of cultural wars about, hey, don't talk about my manhood. But if you say, hey, help me talk about how to be, be the best dad I want to be, I think the conversation becomes different. And then if we're talking to parents about their concerns, there is a big concern about boys in the US and elsewhere at the moment. Globally, boys are falling behind girls in school in about 100 countries in the world, representing a majority of the world's population. We're talking a little bit about that in the US and some countries talking about it. Europe is talking about it, but it's a global phenomenon, and we're not kind of saying, so what do we need to do about that? What are the things? So I think there are some things like that. I think, boys' mental health issues, concern about what our sons are streaming, concerns about porn. Our data shows about 2/3 of adult men access porn at least on a weekly basis. About 1/3 of adult men in the US tell us they've tried to stop using porn or use less and haven't been able to. Average age of watching porn in the US is kind of 11 to 12. So there's a lot to be said and unpacked about that conversation, but I think parents' concern about their sons is a useful moment for us to step in and say, here's some things you can do. And here's a way to do that in a way that's not, again, as I was talking about before, not just exacerbating the crisis, but believing boys want to and can be their best selves.
Mhm. How do you feel about making changes in the school or corporations giving better leave? And I mean, where do we start? How do we
Yeah,
change our culture?
all the above at the same time. We are such a vast country, and the ways that manhood the way that manhood is made in the US is just in so many spaces. So I think we have to work, we've got to work on online spaces. And that involves both some policing and holding platforms accountable for some of the harm, whether that's, porn AI, whether that's sexting. There's ways that we have to hold online spaces accountable for some of that. And there's all the stuff we have to do about parents and teachers and others talking with our sons and daughters about there's no way we're going to not have online life, but how to reduce it, contain it, support young people's ability to step away from the stuff that doesn't make them feel good, that's harmful, how to call out when they see harm, how to look for the best and promote the best online.
Mhm.
I think we do have to do things in schools. There are some great schools and teachers who are trying to do this well. And then there's states and places where it's just a political warfare when I don't think parental worries are that different based on whether you're Republican or Democrat. They sometimes are, but data that we've done and that others have done suggests that both Republican parents and Democrat parents are worried about their sons. What to do, they may differ on, but at least to say we're worried about mental health issues, how much time they spend online, how they learn about manhood, which version. And I think we could probably come up with a list that's mostly positive of what we want our sons to be, of how we define good men. A lot of it's not probably that different across political lines. We've got to, tone down the political rhetoric of those who would weaponize manhood online. We know who they are. That's a whole, that involves voting and calling out. And then, I think we've also, as you alluded to, we've got to get corporations on board with this to acknowledge we've got a lot of men who feel like they don't know what the job market looks like to them. And so how do we get, collaborations between government and corporations on pathways to the kinds of jobs that, with college education or without, that create purpose and that provide dignity, that aren't just about how many hours can I extract from you on an Amazon warehouse floor until you, drop over. So I think, there's things we have to think about in terms of the job market. I'd love to see mainstream media. We do some work. We've partnered with groups like Gina Davis Institute and others on how do we nudge Hollywood to tell, they already do tell some great storytelling of men doing the right thing. How do we do some more nudging to see some more stories of the men we need to be? What else did I not mention in there? The health sector. Suicide and mental health, substance abuse, overdoses, and deaths by suicide are the things that mostly kill men. 2/3 of both of those are men. Firearm violence, the majority of that is actually suicide by men. And then, of course, homicide. How do we talk about that? And then just getting men to seek health services when we need it. Data tells us we've got, that men and women experience depression at kind of fairly equal rates, but that women are twice as likely to seek help when they need it. So whether depression or other mental health issues. So add that to the equation. That's such a driver of men's use of violence against others. It's such a driver as well of men's violence against themselves in terms of suicide. So that would go on my 7 point or 8 point platform as well. I lost count there. Let me stop.
So when you think about how kids are raised, and I think about my own generation, how the women were pushed to, you can do everything. You can be super mom. You can
Yeah.
go to college. You can have a job. You can earn money. And in the meantime, we're also doing all the work, raising the kids and taking care of the house, right? And so there was completely uneven distribution that I would say started, in the 1980s or so. And I worked for
Yeah.
IBM back in the day. It was typically a man's job. And, here I am, the woman giving all these presentations at IBM. And it's such a different, the whole culture around that, because the men did not get any different education. They were just being raised, grow up and be a good provider, go to work and bring home the paycheck. But they
Yeah.
weren't taught that, oh, your sisters are all going to go to college, and do all
Yeah.
these great things. But they didn't get any education about how to step up to that plate. And it seems like now we're finally getting there, right, with my kids' generation, that it's more equally distributed and it's expected that they're supposed to step up to the plate. But
Yep.
even still today, I would say there's a lot of monkey see, monkey do, because the children are growing up in these households and they're going to mimic the behavior in many ways that they see their father is, how the father is acting within the house, how much the father is engaged with the children, how the father is treating the mother, etc. And so how do you then deconstruct that? Because now these children are growing up in this household and it's expected to be, boys don't cry, tough it up,
Yeah.
pull your socks up. And that's how they were raised. And then they go to school and it's pretty much similar. The teachers are overwhelmed already because it's all about, teaching. You have to pass your science test. You have to learn this in math. And, it's very little, depending, I mean, I'm sure there are fabulous teachers out there, but just the overall kind of message that we're bringing to these kids is, do your homework, do your work. And it sort of creates this, facade when they grow up too. So it's no wonder
Yeah.
they all feel lonely and lost.
Yeah. I mean, and I wonder at times, is the world ready for kind, caring boys? Um, just watch and I ask it that way, occasionally we'll think about, oh, we've got to, teach boys to be kind and caring. Actually, I mean, spend half an hour with a 3-year-old boy anywhere, just about from any family where he's been loved. And he's full of kindness and caring. I mean, he pulses a curiosity about the world and, watch what happens then entering the school system and an awareness of how the world does not want and
Hmm.
treat well, kind and caring boys. Um, so, I suppose I find both great anguish in that when I watch how we, kind of beat the hearts and souls out of boys too often. But I'm also optimistic by the fact that, there's a loving spirit and soul within boys if we are brave enough to let them show it.
Hmm.
So that, that is what gives me a bit of hope in all this mix, is that there's boys, young men, and adult men who, behind the facade, um, they do love and care, and it's what gives them meaning. We just don't let them show it and say it and live it.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's so different too that when you think of the society. So, my friends from childhood are now grandmas back over in Sweden.
Yeah.
And she'll send me pictures, look at my grandson, he's 4 years old now. And this is his favorite dress that he wore to
Yeah.
daycare. And I'm just laughing. I'm thinking of how would people react in the United States if I said, my here, posting on social media, here's the dress that my grandson wore to preschool today. And he loves this dress. And in Sweden, that's completely acceptable. They're children. They're trying out what does it feel like to be a bride, what does it feel like to be a groom. Doesn't matter what sex you are. But here in the United States, it's looked at so differently. That's cross-dressing now, as if your child that's 4 years old is, trans, and it's as if that was bad in the first place, right? But they have a tendency to label things so quickly here, and
Yeah,
there's such a conservative measure versus understanding the development of children. But I feel like we in many ways squash these little boys here in this country and say, don't cry, don't do this, you can't wear that, you can't like, a pink elephant, that's girly. And we have so many controls and demands that we put on these young boys. So how
yeah,
do we take that away in society and make it more acceptable?
yeah. I mean, why?
And
Yeah,
teach
why is
people
this?
about that, these are just kids, they're just growing up, they're
Yeah,
learning, they become caring by, what does it feel like to dress like mommy, what does it feel like to dress like a bride, what does
yeah,
that feel like, right? They're learning to be caring and giving by experimenting with all of this as a young child. But
yeah,
in many ways we don't allow that to develop, in early childhood in this country.
yeah. Why is it so frightening, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so as father of a daughter, it was in some ways quite as you talked about, it was quite easy in some ways because the world was saying it wasn't just us trying to be the parents of saying you can be, you can play with Barbie, but you can also play with astronauts and you should. And she's now a sci-fi fan and can, which was kind of a boys thing, but she loves it. Dad loves it. It's a bonding thing. And she, that there you can be a girl sci-fi nerd. Um, and I give that as an example of kind of, that you could be everywhere, as you were just saying. You could be all these things. And I don't, with boys, it's felt like it's either been a steady, you've got to be this, or it's actually contracted. And I think we see the impact at so many levels. So yeah, what is it that allows us to kind of to break out of that?
Hmm.
Um, it's, brave teachers, brave parents. Again, I fall back, where I find some optimism around it is, when like Huggies got called out when they did that first round of commercials that presented dads as inept fathers. And I can't remember where I was sitting someplace recently and watched the new Huggies commercial. And it showed the dad running around and he knew how to do it. And he knows how to braid hair. And there's like a whole online group of dads who braid their daughter's hair or braid their children's hair,
Hmm.
regardless of their sex. Um, so I think, that's where I do find some encouragement that if some adult men can get it, they'll, together with their partners and women in their lives, if some adult men can get it, I think we can pass it on to our kids. Um, and if that doesn't work, then I'll cite the Barbie movie, which I think was like great to show of the 90% of people listening, I'm sure they saw Barbie. The end of that was like, Ken is just hopelessly lost. Barbie had a trajectory of how to break out of her box. Ken was stuck beaching. He just did not like once we took away the like standard ideas about manhood, he was just like walking in circles, lost and alone. So I mean, what an amazing wake-up call of like, a film that got that attention of saying, yeah, we need to do some thinking about Ken. Um, he's pretty freaking lost, and we all suffer because of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that was such a great movie. It was such an important message to everybody that was watching that movie. Now, you mentioned your daughter and how she's, the sci-fi kid growing up. Do you think that it's easier for girls to show masculinity than it is for boys to show femininity?
Good question. I mean, yeah, girls are, I don't want to make it, I mean, girls are policed all the time, and the kind of the body image stuff and the which spaces should you be and the you're responsible for the violence or the sexual abuse that a male may carry out. There's all kinds of challenges that are put on girls as well. I do think we've offered somewhat more space to excel in things that used to be masculine. I mean, been amazing to watch what's happening in women's sports the last years
Mhm.
of the visibility. Slowly, we've not yet, come close to achieving equality, but that used to be in many ways kind of, oh, well, that's, a certain kind of girl. Just to watch that get celebrated, it's pretty amazing. And I think, professions, it's still shameful that, we have not had a woman president, the percentage of politicians and CEOs, et cetera. But, and I don't mean to say but, and, there's still some other ways that I think we have made it okay for women and girls to be in places that were previously considered male. Um, doesn't mean we're done, doesn't mean by any, that it's easy to be a young woman in this country, but I think there's a bigger social space.
Mhm. So how do we start this conversation with our sons or husbands or brothers?
Um, you know, and I mentioned this in my TED talk around what is a conversation that doesn't lead to the defensiveness. We don't, I mean, we're an organization that talks about manhood. It's in our organizational name, but that's for kind of fellow researchers and program folks and others to come find us. The conversations that we have with boys and men will often start with, tell me who you care about. Tell me what you care about. What are you passionate about? Um, there's seldom, even a guy who might politically think I'm too feminist and whatever, um, that we can't engage in a conversation about who you care about. And at some point, it will also lean into, you might be very distraught about the harm that you've done to somebody you care about, or that you're estranged from them, but you're not indifferent about it. And I think even some of the most, some of the angriest guys out there, there is someone somehow they're caring about. Um, it's not that tough to get that conversation going. Um, there's other moments if you've been in an internet space where just that you want to be angry at everybody all the time, that it may be tough to get to that conversation. But it's not that tough to get guys to talk about who they care about. You know, X% of the time, it's probably going to start with mom because she's caring for him most days more often. Not always. It's going to be some cool dads and grandparents and uncles, a teacher, a coach, a brother. But I think, just like flexing your care muscle, just let him do that. Believe that he does, believe that he can. So yeah, that's kind of the one that I'll start with.
Is there like a platform or social media or something that people could go to and learn more about it or send their kids to
I
have
mean,
more of a safe
yeah,
space?
our stuff is more for those who work with boys and men. So we have our Equimundo website, equimundo.org, EQUIMUNDO.org. We have two global campaigns. One is called Men Care, and that's about men and caregiving, just mencare.org. And we have one called the Global Boyhood Initiative as well. And that's also just globalboyhood.org. All pretty easy. They are more materials for those who raise and support boys and men than they are for boys and men themselves. Um, Fatherhood Incorporated in the US is the probably biggest fatherhood group. Amazing stuff that's out there. They do lots and lots of great resources for dads. So there are places to go there. I'll also, call out a call to men, does some great work, particularly around sports. And I'll also call out another partner organization called Futures Without Violence. Lots of great stuff for boys and men as well. They have a program called Coaching Boys into Men. So yeah, shout outs to to those groups who also do great work in this space.
Oh, that's great. There's so many resources, and we'll make sure to put all those
Okay.
links in the
Yeah.
podcast notes so that people can find a way to learn more about it. Because, I mean, in the end, this is how we're going to make the world a better place, is by, allowing men to show their feminine qualities, which they all have. Like you said, it's just a matter of changing the norms in our society and the way we educate our boys.
Yeah. And I'd even push a bit of kind of, occasionally I'll hear that of, oh, I want to show my feminine side, and go, no, I want to claim that. I am care, for example, the care for others, being competent at how to do that,
Mhm.
being able to show emotional vulnerability. I think we've got to strip away that's labeled feminine,
Mhm.
just as excelling in engineering, or, hitting either a three-pointer or an amazing goal in soccer can be, I don't think we have to say, oh, that's so masculine, she's showing her masculine self. Let's just say that's that's a great
Okay.
human trait.
Mhm.
We're all, how do we kind of strip away that, so that we don't kind of immediately label it? It's so in our heads, right?
Mhm.
This thing that we often call the gender binary, right? That we need to label it,
Yep.
male or female. Like, how do we just kind of say, well, it's just, it's part of the human array. Um, and these are really good, many of these, the things I just listed, they're like great human traits. Um, Try to strip the gender politics of them and just free them for all of us.
Well, it's been such a pleasure to have you as a guest today. And you're just teaching us about masculinity and all the work that you're doing. Now, if you had one message that you would give to the listeners, what would that be?
Hmm. I think I'll go back to the point I had about just, letting your boys care. They do. We just, we too often repress it or beat it out of them. Let them be the full-hearted humans who live through their connection and cooperation, collaboration with other humans. That relational quality, to call it that, is what makes us fully human. Um, Believe in it, nurture it, inculcate it. Um, you don't even have to make it; he's got it. Just give him the freedom to use it.
That's a wonderful message. So, we're going to put all the links again in the podcast notes. And it's been such a pleasure and an honor to have you as a guest today, Gary.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for talking about these topics. It's really important.
Do you ever find yourself struggling with the weight of loneliness? Or maybe you pride yourself on your independence, yet deep down you crave a sense of connection to others. Do you feel like chronic illnesses or financial fears are holding you back from living your fullest life? If any of these feelings or experiences resonate with you, then you might be carrying what is called an ancestral mother wound. I invite you to join me on Saturday, June 8th, 2024, for my upcoming live masterclass titled Ancestral Healing: Healing Your Ancestral Mother Wound. Ancestral healing relates to the patterns of behavior and experiences of our ancestors. We take on patterns of behavior and thoughts subconsciously from our parents, as well as aunts, uncle, grandparents, and others. And we get entangled in these energies, and these patterns are repeated in the generations that follow until healed. But once we can recognize why we're having certain experiences, we can find the patterns that are causing them and the tools to heal them. I work with clients around the globe who wish to lead lives filled with meaning, worth, health, and flourishing connections to others, who find themselves suffering from low self-worth, in inability to feel and receive love from others, unfulfilling relationships, health struggles, and more. In this masterclass, you will learn what an ancestral mother wound is and how a mother wound presents itself in your life, work, or relationships. Learn how the words you use and the feelings you experience guide and illuminate your path to healing. It is my joy and honor to guide you on your journey to healing your ancestral mother wound. And I hope to see you in this online class on June 8th. And you can find the link in the show notes to learn more and to save your spot for this masterclass. As we conclude this episode, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude for your presence within our community. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with friends and family. Subscribe to my newsletter in the show notes and receive new podcast episodes delivered right to your inbox. If you resonate with the interconnectedness of mind, body, and soul, and are motivated to embark on a journey of personal healing, I invite you to connect with me at drlottie.com. Together, we can pave a path towards transformative healing in your own life.